Sarah Hoffs from the Rhinebeck School of Music, and in this lesson we are going to learn about major chord inversions, or movable chords for the ukulele. So most of you probably know all of your open basic chords and your strumming and playing and maybe singing. But there's a certain point where maybe you want to kind of venture along the fretboard a little more and start to play what are called chord inversions. So you play little chord melodies. Just to get a little more movement, play across the fretboard a little bit. So what is a chord inversion? An inversion just means you're flipping the order of things. So if you know this basic G shape here, it's really only comprised of 3 notes. You have what's called a root, a third, and a fifth. Since this is a major chord, it's a root, a major third, and a fifth. So actually the 3 notes that you're playing in this chord are just G, B, and D. Okay? So now if I go and I want to play this chord in another place on the fretboard, I still have those notes, G, B, and D, they're just in a different order. So for example, this is a G, this is a D, this is a G, this is a B. But when I switch to this inversion, now this is a D, this is a G, this is a B, and this is a D. So it's the same chord, you have a different note in the melody, and it has a little bit of a different sound because now these notes are just, they're like an octave higher. Another way to play that same chord is like this, if you want the root in the melody, or if you're doing something maybe where you're putting the major 7 or the major 6. So with this voicing you get the 5th in the melody. With this one, it's built off of the same kind of shape, right? It's just this one you're putting, the root in the melody, this one you're putting the 5th in the melody. So you have this chord shape, you have this chord shape, or an alternative would be that one. And then the last one is kind of like this B flat shape that you play down here. And you're just playing it here. So now you have the root here, you have the 5th, you have the 3rd, and you have another root here. So those are 3 ways, with one little variation here, to play the G chord across the fretboard. So I have a little PDF attached with this lesson for patrons. Different ways you can practice this. You can practice, you can break it up into parts. Like maybe you just want to play the bottom 3 strings or the top 3 strings. Just practicing it in different ways so you can hear what that sounds like. And also depending on the melody notes that you're playing within your chord melody or whatever you're playing, you may want to play just to that note, or you may want the B in the melody. Whereas this one, you might want the D in the melody, or the B, or the G, or the D, or the G. And it's always going to be in the same order. So you always have this G shape to this shape, which is kind of like the D shape, and then this one, which is kind of like, the B flat or B shape that you're moving around, or even the open A shape, because that's really where it comes from. It's just when you move that chord around the fretboard, you're just closing off those open strings now. So you can do this with any chord. So say, C is another good one. So after this shape, you have that shape. And after that shape, you have this shape. So this is the G shape, it's just I barred it and I add this finger to close off that open string. And then the last inversion would be this one. You can close that off here, or also play it that way again. And then the last one I'll demonstrate is the A major, which starts with that shape. And then this next one, which comes from the G shape, just moved over 2 frets. So you have this shape to this shape, and then the last shape would be this one, or this one. Right? So they're always following that same order, right? It's always from this shape to this shape to that shape. So I'll give a little bit of advice. A lot of string players, ukulele players, guitar players alike, they all fall into the trap of memorizing shapes. So it's all good and well to know, oh, that's my G, that's my G, that's a G, and know your different inversions and the order and where to play them. But what's really going to help you when you start to talk about like extensions, like say you want to play sus2s or sus4s, or you want to play, you know, like an add 9 chord, or you want to play like an 11 and add 11, or a 13, or whatever, you know, like there's different extensions that you can play. You're not going to really know how to do that independently unless you really know where your root, your third, and your fifth are within your chord. So the root is always what the chord is named after. So it's a G chord, you always want to know where your G is. There's 2 of them in this shape, right? They're here. And then you always want to know where your third is, which is here, the B, and your fifth, which is the D. And that way, like, you know, if you're doing music theory and someone says, oh, to play a sus4, you just move the third up 1/2 step. Well, if you don't know where the third in your chord is, you're not going to know how to do that. So just a little bit of advice when you're learning these inversions, and I've written them out, you know, what the notes are. Just know where your root and your third and your fifth are with each one. Makes your life a lot easier going forward. And also I want to talk about, you know, some terminology. So when you play something from the root, that's called a root inversion chord, because you're starting on the root. If you play something from what's called, you know, the third of the chord, that's called a first inversion. So you're taking the third and you're putting it in the bass instead of the root. When you put the fifth as the first note in the chord, then that is called a second inversion chord. Okay, so going through all these in G, if I start with this chord and I start on the open G, that's a root position chord. However, if I need to move that chord around, I have to play it like this, because if you keep that open G string and you move it into certain places, it doesn't always really sound that good to have that open G, especially on that chord, right? So what you do is you put the third in the bass there, third is the starting note, and now that's a first inversion chord, and then you can move it around and it'll sound nice. So you've got root position or first inversion, second inversion with the fifth in the bass, which you can play 2 ways. You can play it like this, or you can play it like that, and then off of this, this is your root. So that's another root position chord. So from here, either root position or first inversion, second inversion, root inversion. Okay, so I started with major chords first, but this is a big study. So, you know, I'm gonna focus just on the major chords this time, and I'll do another video on how to do this with all of your minor chords. And then, you know, some other chords you might want to get into your vocabulary if you're doing chord melody would be diminished chords and dominant 7 chords. And if you want to get into jazz, you might even want to, you know, do half diminished or minor 7 flat 5 chords. So, so for now, you know, the way you practice these is like, you know, just kind of play around finding your G to your G to your G, and then your C to your C to your C. And try to do that with all of your major chords. See if you can figure out where they are. Alright, so hopefully this was helpful. If you haven't already, visit www.rhinebeckschoolofmusic.com and subscribe. Become a patron, www.patreon.com/rhinebeckschoolofmusic. I'll see you at the next one.